A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari and I hope that you all must be doing fine. So let's start with today's analysis video, which is going to be for 1st of March 2023. So when we try to understand the GDP figures for quarter 3 of the current financial year, it slows down to 4.4%, and the NSO estimates basically for the period 2022-23 of the GDP expansion, they have been estimated at 7%, and we've been looking at the manufacturing sector. It continued to shrink at a slower pace, and trying to understand this pictograph, we see that this graph is basically also depicting the growth rate during different quarters. So post the pandemic, we saw that it was increasing, and as we talk about, we were seeing a V-shaped recovery, and after that sometime it started falling, and it is fluctuating as of now, we can say. So quarterly data showed that GDP growth down from 6.3% in September quarter after the consumption weekend following the India's festive season. But the National Statistics Office full year forecast for the year ending March 31st, that remained unchanged at 7%. For the whole financial year, the estimate is at 7%. And this is basically, it would be ranking India's economic outlook above every other major country. And economists termed the manufacturing sector's persistent slack a negative surprise that brought quarter 3 growth levels lower than their projections. So the manufacturing sector is shrinking and it is contracting, and the growth momentum has carried. It is base effect that has given us a 4.4% rate. Since the data is not seasonally adjusted and quarter on quarter growth trends should be interpreted with care, so there is nothing to suggest that we won't be able to get a 7% real GDP growth in the current financial year. So again, Supreme Court on the issues between governors and different chief ministers of different states. So it says that governors and chief ministers, they must have a mature dialogue. Political differences in a democratic polity, they are acceptable and they have to be worked out with a sense of sobriety and maturity without allowing the discourse to degenerate into a race to the bottom. So keeping aside all the political vested interest, the governor and definitely chief minister, they must obviously work in a mature fashion and ensure that they are adhering to the constitution and not just trying to pull each other down. So there was a spat between the Punjab chief minister and the governor of the state during the convening of the budget session of the assembly. So the court is cognizant of the importance of free speech and expression. It is necessary to emphasize that dialogue between constitutional functionaries has to be conducted with a sense of decorum and mature statesmanship. So G20, here you should be knowing about the motto, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That means one earth, one family, and one future. So we'll be having the first anti-corruption working group meeting in Haryana, which is also known as the land of the gods, and it would be hosted in Gurugram. So this article is talking about the noise pollution. So the high decibel defenders of Delhi. So legal action can be taken against the offenders under provisions of the Delhi Police Act. So forget about sleeping. You can't even lie down in peace with the loud music and noise when there is a function in your lane or in your neighborhood. But that's the kind of adjustment you have to make as a neighbor, and it's basically by a victim of, we can say, noise pollution. So in 2022, Delhi police received around 46,000 noise pollution related complaints, out of which 40,000 were against the DJ music at weddings and other events as per the official data. And obviously, maximum complaints were filed during the festival season and the wedding season. Apart from that, so as per the rules, you cannot play loudspeakers after 10 p.m. And this was instituted in 2005. So you need to be like aware about the red sanders. It is the smuggling is prevalent in the state of Andhra Pradesh, and that is there obviously in Eastern Ghats. Then you need to find out about its IUCN status and if it like if it is found in other states of India or not. So there will be another global investors meet in Visakhapatnam, and arrangements are in full swing to host the Global Investors Summit scheduled in Andhra Pradesh University Engineering College, and like a similar one was hosted by UP also. So different states they are trying to attract the FDI into their states so as to ensure more job creations and more growth of their GSDP levels. So hand pumps and platforms in tankas, saving women's lives in Barmer. So the intervention in the structural additions forms part of a campaign jointly launched by the district administration to prevent the suicides in the district. So let's understand this case study. So amid a surge in the cases of women allegedly jumping to death in the tanks and the wells, along with their children following the marital disputes in the Rajasthan Barmer district, an innovative intervention has been made for the structural additions in the tankas, which basically the big tanks, they are known as tankas there, and to be constructed in the households and on agricultural land in the rural areas. So tankas with a huge water storage capacity, they are traditionally built adjacent to the residential units in the western Rajasthan for collecting rainwater and using it throughout the year. So these are used for rainwater harvesting. And so the district authorities they have observed that in cases when women and children they allegedly jump in these tankas, it is almost impossible for them to survive because of its depth. And administration had earlier experimented with the installation of chain or sankel, which is pulley inside the tanks, but it did not work out. So the Anmol Jeevan Abhiyan, which is Precious Life campaign, was launched in Barmer recently. It has encouraged the village panchayats and the owners of the houses to make the structural addition of hand pumps and logged covers on the tanka. So basically, these are being now covered and hand pumps are being installed in order to ensure that no such incidences are repeated in future. So, analyzing the Adopt a Heritage scheme into its nitty-gritties and important details from the perspective of civil services examination. So private firms, companies, and public sector units, they can enter into agreements with the Union Ministry of Culture to adopt and maintain the state-owned archaeological sites of the monuments. So businesses that enter such agreements, they are going to be known as the Monument Mitras. So the central government, it is eager that this scheme, which began in February, it leads to the adoption of 500 protected sites by August 15 and the adoption of another 500 sites shortly thereafter. So this number represents a tenfold increase in the number of sites being adopted and being brought under the ambit of the controversial Adopt a Heritage scheme of 2017. And unless the revamped scheme is suspended, the nation's precious pluralistic heritage stands at the threshold of obliteration. So talking about what the perils ahead, under the purportedly overhauled adopt a heritage scheme, businesses, they may use their corporate social responsibility funds at select sites to construct and maintain the ticket offices, restaurants, museums, interpretation centers, toilets, and walkways. So they may dramatically eliminate the monuments, set up the guided tours, whole cultural programs. So that's how basically the businesses, they can use their corporate social responsibility funds in maintaining different cultural heritage sites. And to begin with, just as permitting a watch company without expertise in bridge engineering to maintain a colonial era bridge in Morbi, Gujarat, possibly it contributed to heart-wrenching tragedy. So to giving businesses rather than trained professionals a chance to build the museums and interpretation centers and develop their content, that threatens the understanding of its own past. So the first peril is that we need to ensure that we are giving this opportunity to trained professionals who basically have the experience in maintaining such monuments of obviously historical and cultural importance. So that needs to be ensured. Otherwise, it could lead to such incidences as we saw in Morbi, Gujarat, where a watch company without expertise was given this responsibility of bridge engineering. So the current plan also sidelines the mandate of the Archaeological Survey of India and abandons the Sarnath initiative, which is the guidelines devised by the Archaeological Survey of India, the Getty Trust, the US and British Museum, and the National Culture Fund to safe keep excavated objects and present them to visitors in an engaging manner. Secondly, many monuments selected for the scheme, including the stupas at Sachi, the Brideshwar temple in Thanjavur, Akbar's palace city at Fatehpur Sikri. So all these places become important. You need to find out more about them. And they like already have the tourist infrastructure. So what is driving the need for new ticket offices and gift shops at such places? So we already have like sufficient amount of tourist infrastructure at such places. So do we really need basically private businesses to spend more here where there's no much need? Further, is it acceptable to let the businesses occupy the prime public land and build their own brands under the provision of the adopted scheme at the cost of further diminishing the grounds around these iconic monuments? So obviously, if businesses, they would be allowed to spend their funds, so that would be in a way we can say they would be advertising their own businesses. So is it really the right way of doing it or not is the question. And another danger of implementing this scheme is that it will undermine the local communities and their relationships with the historical sites. So obviously, once these private businesses, they would come in, they would step in, the distance, or we can say the gap between the local communities and these historical sites would increase. So guided tours led by the employees of the large businesses who have received permission to adopt a monument may endanger the livelihoods of those who have lived near these sites, who might have acted as local guides and made a living by regaling the visitors with the stories of its colorful past. And the potential of big businesses to underwrite a monument's elimination is also troubling. And another danger is that what will happen to the monuments not adopted by the monument mitras in the predetermined time frame. And according to media reports, Uttar Pradesh government, it has started turning over such monuments to the tourism department to convert them into hotels. And that includes the Chunar Fort, a citadel which is overlooking the Barvasagar Lake, and several residences built by the Awadh's Nawabs. So the UP government's decision confirms that despite now being housed under the Ministry of Culture rather than the Ministry of Tourism, the scheme, it is continuing to place reckless tourism and corporate interest over the historical preservation. So these are the keywords, and now it is under Ministry of Culture, and earlier it was under Ministry of Tourism. So these two ministries, they have long been intertwined, and even today they are led by the same cabinet minister. So what might the corporate India instead do to look after the nation's built heritage? So first, businesses, they can help the citizens understand why monuments they matter, and this can be done by earmarking the Corporate social responsibility funds for grants for researching, writing, and publishing high quality textbooks and developing imaginative and effective ways of teaching history to them. Then these corporates, they might also follow the lead taken up by Sudha Murthy and R. Narayanan Murthy in giving gifts to organizations such as Bhadarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune to continue their missions of writing history by rationally coordinating the textual record and archaeological evidences. Secondly, the industrial houses, they can support the meaningful conservation of heritage buildings by looking within. So their CSR funds, they can be used to purchase new equipments that release fewer noxious gases that darken and corrode the marble buildings and discharge fewer effluents into rivers, thus making these water bodies less likely to serve as breeding grounds of microbes that gather on the walls of the ancient buildings erected on river banks and cause their decay. So currently, India's progress in diverse fields is being projected at G20 events across the nation. And by embracing forward thinking principles of historical preservation, businesses, government agencies, civil societies, groups, they can showcase India's genuine progress in this arena. And maybe their efforts will inspire more citizens to participate in the pressing task of safeguarding India's pluralistic heritage. So the religious polarization, it can be reversed through democratic processes. So talking about the situation in Kashmir, the death of Kashmiri Pandit and the vanguard Sanjay Sharma at the hands of terrorist gunmen in Pulwama is yet another murder in a series of attacks on the minority community in the valley. And the murder could be a deliberate ploy by the terrorists to strike fear into the minority community which is living in the area, and it also signals the failure of security agencies to adequately protect the poor residents. So, the modus operandi of the radical elements who are targeting civilians has always been clear. The attacks, they are meant to invite state retaliation and repression, in turn fomenting discontent and disaffection to garner more recruits to the cause. And so obviously, every political party and the civil society organizations, they have condemned the attacks, but the repeated and the brazen nature of the killings at one level point to a breakdown of the relations between the administration and the citizenry, leading to the inability of the administration to anticipate and prevent such attacks. So the fact that areas that were relatively safe for the minority community, even during the peak of militancy, they have now become unsafe, suggests that administration must rethink its security-centric policies in the valley. And the Union Territory Administration and the Union government, they have claimed that hard-edged moves such as the dilution of Article 370, then bifurcating the state in 2019 have helped curb militancy and were necessary to bring back normalcy in the valley. But the repeated attacks that we are seeing on minority communities suggest otherwise, that radical sections, they have sought to utilize the disaffection in the valley to foment the polarization, and only an effective government by elected representatives of the people of the valley can do more to rebuild the trust between the administration and the citizens over there. So this will help isolate the radical sections and ease the workload of the security forces in Kashmir. So restoring the statehood to Jammu and Kashmir and working towards the conduct of assembly elections are now a clear imperative over there in order to increase the security of the citizens of India. So India's democracy diminished and declining. So article written by a senior advocate and a former union minister for law and justice. So he says that the recaptivating Republic Day parade in January this year showcased India's soft and hard power, sending out a message to the world of India's arrival on the global scene. So even our president's customary address to the Houses of Parliament during the budget session again in January unfolded the government's ambitious agenda and a shared national aspiration to join the ranks of the developed nations in the near future. So, but the truth about India's declining democracy has taken the sheen away from an otherwise impressive story of nation's significant accomplishments. So, here we are talking about the India's declining democracy. So we are seeing an erosion of engagement. So recurring reports about the constitutional transgressions interrogate the depth and quality of our democratic engagement. And in recent days, the expunging of parliamentary statements of the opposition leaders, which is questionable, then the disruption of Prime Minister's speech in Rajya Sabha, the disproportionate penalty of suspension, which is imposed on the opposition MPs for recording the proceedings of the House, and the exceptions apart, the nauseating pluralities of the people's representatives, they have denuded Parliament of its institutional sanctity. Then we are seeing suicide of an 18-year-old Dalit student in one of the country's premier education institutions because of unbearable distress, and a 16-year-old Dalit student being beaten up by his principal, as the boy is said to have drank water from the principal's water bottle. These are definitely painful reminders of the persistence of historical and social inequities. So the conviction and the sentencing by a court in Uttar Pradesh of a sitting member of the Legislative Assembly for a 2-year jail term in a 15-year-old case for blocking a road is perverse, and considering the disproportionality of the sentence and its resultant consequence of depriving an elected member of a seat in the state assembly. So, deteriorating conversations, but nowhere is the democratic deficit more pronounced as in the quality of our political discourse. So, the profanities hurled by leaders at each other, the personal broadsides laced with denigrating sarcasm and hurting the innuendos, they have coarsened the fabric of the democratic politics. So, the political language of our times, steeped in hypocrisy and then intense personal animosities, that reflects the narrowness of our politics and vitiates it. So it infracts the dignitarian promise of the Constitution, and it is destructive of the broader social accord. We know that language, culture, imagination, and histories, they are united in a tight embrace. So the elegance of the spoken word, not its decibel, adds weight to the cause and enables leaders to engage with the people on the defining challenges of the age. And the spoken words and speeches of the leaders there that provides the benchmark of democracy, and standing of republic figures is tested through their utterances, which also tells us who we are. Evidently, therefore, India's diminished democracy can be resurrected only through an ennobling political discourse defined by the civil conversation founded in reason and faith in the power of decency to make a difference. And the challenge, that is the celebration of republic, cannot be complete as long as our politics remains limited by narrow partisan perspectives, and it is derived by those who projected concern at pervasive injustices is largely suspect. So given their obsession with a compulsive pursuit of power for its own sake. So international courts and the climate change, a group of 16 countries, they have launched a gallant effort to fight the problem of climate change, an existential threat to human civilization at United Nations, and it is led by Vanuatu, and which is an island country in the South Pacific Ocean. So the group seeks an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the issue of climate change. So basically, ICJ, it has two types of jurisdictions. One is contentious and then is advisory. So while contentious jurisdiction, it refers to resolving the legal disputes between the consenting states under the advisory jurisdiction, and the UNGA, the Security Council, and other specialized bodies of the organization, they can request the ICJ for an opinion on a legal question. Unlike the decisions given under the contentious jurisdiction, the ICJ's advisory opinions, they are non-binding. So Vanuatu's initiative, notwithstanding the presence of the several international legal instruments on the climate change, such as we have the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, we have Kyoto Protocol, we have Paris Agreement, the international community, it has fallen short of delivering the concrete solutions to the problem of climate change. And recently we had the COP27 where countries they failed to narrow their differences on critical issues such as reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, perfectly exemplifies the failure of the international community to get its act together on the issue of climate change. And definitely small island developing states such as Vanuatu, they are mostly vulnerable to rising temperatures and the sea levels. So, legal questions specifically, the draft resolution piloted by Vanuatu, it seeks answers to the following questions from the ICJ. So, the first question is, what are the international law obligations of countries toward the protection of the climate system from anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases for the present and the future generations? Second is, given these international legal obligations, what are the legal consequences for states that have caused significant harm to the climate system? And the SID states and basically that is a small island developing nations and other people of the present and the future generations. And so the role of IT law, so it is not just the ICJ whose advisory opinion is being sought, had the Commission of Small Island States and Climate Change and International Law, comprising countries like Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu, they have sought the advisory opinion of Hamburg-based International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So it has been requested to determine the specific obligations of countries under the United Nations Conventions on the Law of Sea about preventing, controlling, reducing pollution of marine environment. So basically, they are more focusing upon what are the legal obligations of different countries as far as climate change is concerned, and what are going to be the legal consequences if they fail to meet their legal obligations. So this article is talking about regulating the online sale of drugs in India. So what is the All India Organization of Chemists and Druggists threatening a countrywide agitation against e-pharmacies? And how have the online drug delivery stores taken up a large share of the market? Then will the Ministry of Health ban e-pharmacies or not is the question. So in early Feb, the Ministry of Health, it pulled up at least 20 companies, included Tata 1mg, Flipkart, Apollo, Pharmacy, likewise, by issuing them a show cause notice for selling medicines online. So this happened after the All India Organization of Chemists and Druggists, which is a powerful lobby of over 12 lakh pharmacists, they threatened to launch a countrywide agitation if the government didn't act. And minister even went so far as to say that e-pharmacies they should be closed down. So is banning e-pharmacies a viable option or not? So the health ministry it has adopted a blow hot blow cold approach towards online pharmacies. So the acute need for the doorstep delivery of the drugs was felt during COVID-19 and the year 2020. It marked a watershed moment for the growth of e-pharmacies as the Ministry of Home Affairs issued orders for them to continue to operate. So that was basically a watershed moment for these e-pharmacies during COVID-19, and banning e-pharmacies would be like throwing the baby out of the bath water. This is as per the senior official from the health ministry. And the demand for the online delivery of drugs it is still burgeoning, and there is a possibility that some of these businesses will go underground if banned. So even that is another concern that they might function in a black market. So the draft e-pharmacy rules, which were originally intended to whip the e-pharmacy businesses into shape, were floated by the Ministry of Health in 2018, and these rules were finalized, they were public comments were taken into consideration, and they were almost on the brink of being notified. But the proposal, it was abruptly shoved into the cold storage, and they were never issued. So how are e-pharmacies competing with mom and pop chemist shops? So flush with the billions of dollars of private equity money to infuse e-pharmacies, they made a bang in the market in 2015, and they started offering hefty discounts on medicines in a bid to garner more market share. So these e-pharmacies, they can themselves facilitate the doorstep delivery, and So what is the next thing for such e-pharmacies and such platforms? So both e-pharmacies and the offline retail pharmacies, they have realized that in a climate where the drug delivery is driven by consumer sentiments, it is futile to stick to any one way of doing business. So in the past 8 years, the market penetration of e-pharmacies has seen single-digit growth from 3% to 5%, and it is just one additional option for consumers for buying the chronic care medicines for diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiac issues, and so on. So for acute care and emergency patients, they still rely on their neighborhood pharmacy stores. So this has led e-pharmacy players to now open the capital-intensive brick and mortar stores as well. And until March 2021, Reliance had opened around 114 pharmacies inside their Smart Point grocery stores. It plans to open 2,000 more outlets. So they are now even like opening their brick and mortar shops and stores. So stiff competition now it has forced these mom and pop pharmacies to also offer the home delivery options to their consumers by introducing their own store apps. And they even give customers options to order medicines over WhatsApp. So in an ecosystem that is moving towards a hybrid mode, all eyes are on the Ministry of Health, which will have to effectively regulate the new way of doing e-commerce in the drug space. So here regulation becomes very important. And RBI's new pilot project on coin vending machines. So RBI Governor Shaktikant Das, he had stated during the last Monetary Policy Committee address that the apex banking regulator, in collaboration with the banks, would be launching a pilot project to assess the functioning of a QR code based coin vending machine. So what is this project all about? So in simple words, the vending machines, they would dispense coins with the requisite amount being debited from the customer's account using UPI instead of physical tendering of the bank notes. And customers, they would be endowed the option of withdrawing coins in required quantities and denominations. Then the central idea here is to ease the accessibility to coins. So we are seeing that the coins, they are taking a lot of storage space and they're not getting properly distributed. At the same time, there is demand in the pockets about for coins as well. So the proposed mechanism for the coin dispensation would be a departure from the conventional machines which relied on banknotes for facilitating the coin exchanges. Further, the proposed machine would eliminate the need for physical tendering of the banknotes and their authentication. So it is observed that the currency being fed into the machines were often found to be fake and not to be checked right at that point of time. So there's a mandate to eliminate the physical tendering of the banknotes. So the pilot is initially planned to be rolled out at 19 locations, and with particular focus on ease and accessibility, these machines, they are intended to be installed at public places such as railway stations, shopping mall, and marketplace. So are coins significant in our ecosystem? So RBI, as per the latest RBI bulletin, the total value of circulation of rupee coins, it stood at around rupees 28,857 crores as of 30th December. Figure is an increase of 7.2% from the year ago period. So circulation of small coins remained unchanged. And for perspective, coins in India, they are issued in denominations of 50 paise, 1 rupee, 2 rupees, 5 rupees, 10 rupees, and 20 rupees. And coins of up to 50 paise are called the small coins, while those of 1 rupee and above, they are called the rupee coins. So the figures above could be compared to the volume of digital payment. And is it going against the digital push or not? So according to Vipul Kharbananda, who is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Internet and Society, the proposal should not be viewed as a zero-sum game of digital versus cash. So the two can easily supplement each other, and they should not be looked at from a very dogmatic point of view, rather a pragmatic one. And if digitalization is not solving a particular problem at this given point of time, then it is very much within RBI's purview to use other means available to achieve its ultimate objective, that is to operate the currency system of the country. So it is no harm to the digitalization. So basically India should stick to the middle path in the new world disorder. So, the arena of the looming US China great power contest is Asia. Instead of aligning with any bloc, India should aim to create new pillars of the global order through engagement and partnership with middle powers. And India has recently once again abstained from voting in a UNGA resolution that condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the country has consistently resisted international pressure to criticize Russia and its actions. So this article explains why India should follow a path of multi-engagement and not multi-alignment. So we see that many governments, including India, Russia, China, they welcome multipolarity, but the US remains the world's most powerful military power. And but US's ability to shape the geopolitical outcomes it is clearly in decline, as was seen in its withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years of war, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is challenging the post Cold War security equilibrium in Europe. So these changes actually leave the world in a flux. So there's a lack of clarity on which direction the world is headed, which makes policy making harder for middle powers like India. So, non alignment success when India became independent, the Cold War still in its early stages, and for nearly free a country with enormous challenges in an ideologically and geopolitically divided world, managing its foreign policy itself was a daunting task for India back then when we became independent. But a long view of India's foreign policy trajectory would tell us that India, which adopted non alignment as the foreign policy doctrine, did well in managing most of its challenges. So, if in the 1950s Jawaharlal Nehru had opposed Zhou Enlai's proposal for a permanent Afro-Asian secretariat, saying it would create yet another bloc, the same Nehru would support turning non-alignment into a movement in the 1960s after the Central Treaty Organization and the Southeast Asia Treaty Organizations were formed. So if in 1950s and 60s India maintained equidistance from both the blocs, living up to the true spirit of non-alignment, in the 1970s after China fell out with the Soviet Union and started moving closer toward the US, it started tilting towards the Soviet Union but stayed out of any Soviet led military alliances. So we have been trying to maintain the balance, and we're not aligned with any bloc. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, India sought to transform its ties with US and integrate itself with the global economy in the new era of globalization. But it also maintained close defense and strategic ties with Russia at the same time and built a vibrant economic partnership with China also. So you can see India has been adopting multi-engagement instead of multi-alignment. And learning from China, so primarily India should prepare itself for a prolonged strategic competition with China, and India could perhaps learn a lesson from what China did in the 1970s. So the Soviet Union was China's ideological brother and neighbor, but China did not want to play second fiddle to the Soviets, and it broke away from the Soviet communist fold and built a quasi alliance with the US, and it helped the imperialist bloc defeat the Soviet communists. And once it acquired enough economic and military power, China, it started gradually challenging US, which has led to today's open contest between US and China. So likewise, India's primary focus, it should be on transforming itself economically and militarily, and it should stay focused on its rise and bridging the gap with China. It should present itself as a natural stabilizing power in South Asia and in the Indonesian region, and a source of prosperity at a time when China is making inroads into the region. And this cannot be achieved unless India keeps its social cohesion intact and it continues to grow. And China is not the only problem that India faces. It's a continental and maritime power in Asia. And while China poses serious challenges to India's maritime influence in continental Asia, India sees a different set of challenges, especially after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and Taliban's return to power, because obviously we are expecting that would in a way be promoting more terrorist activities. So to address its continental security challenges and manage its inroads into Central Asia, India has to work with Eurasian powers such as Russia and Iran, both of which are at odds with the US. So abandoning its strategic autonomy and joining a US-led bloc would in fact limit India's options in the new world, besides provoking China also. So, a legislator facing disqualification cannot attend a floor test, and the legislator attending a trust vote would amount to legitimizing a constitutional sin coming from the Supreme Court. So, allowing a MP or an MLA who is facing disqualification under the anti defection law to participate in a floor test caused by his own doings will defeat the very purpose of the 10th schedule of the Constitution. So, on the one hand, you say somebody who defects causes a split within the party and is liable to be disqualified. And at the same time, you say that even if that person is liable to be disqualified, in the meantime, he can participate in the trust vote in the House. So, Vice President says that tackling the breach of privilege is not throttling free speech. So, Jagdeep Dharkan alludes to disruptions during the sessions in both the houses of the parliament while explaining the breach of privilege mechanism. He also urges students to question and neutralize those who play politics. So the portal has been opened for complaints against decisions of the social media platforms. And Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology on Tuesday launched the Grievance Appellate Committee portal under the IT Rules 2021, allowing people dissatisfied with the resolution of complaints to social media companies on content takedown request to be heard by one of the three committees constituted by the government. So this marks a shift in how social media content is moderated in India. So you can find out more about these guidelines. So ISRO successful in key tests for India's third moon mission. So we are testing and checking if things are in place. So heat waves are likely from March to May as per the IMD forecast. And as far as the heat waves are concerned, so we are having concerns for the domestic production of wheat also. So government will be supporting the onion farmers. So on the other hand, we are seeing that onion prices, they are crashing. So proton beam therapy is out of reach for many who are suffering because of cancer. So cancer patients in India face twin challenges when it comes to accessing the proton beam therapy, which is not enough facilities offering the treatment and cost running to many lakhs of rupees. So firstly, they are not easily available, and secondly, they are highly expensive. So it is considered a viable alternative to the radiation for treating the solid tumors, especially in head and the neck cancers. So this has proved useful in the cases of young women whose ovaries and reproductive function could be salvaged through the therapy. The situation is extremely tense around Bamut, which is there in Ukraine. And this territory is the recent focus of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So the core sector output rose to 10-month high in January. So output across the eight infrastructure sectors expanded by 7.8%, accelerated from December 7% year-on-year increase, and double-digit growth in electricity and coal suggested steady industrial momentum. So this is one of the positive developments, but at the same time, we saw that in quarter three, the GDP, it shrank. So we are having basically, we can say, mixed signals as of now. And there is no need for exaggerated concern over the external account. Coming from the chief economic advisor, so there is no need for exaggerated concern about the India's external account situation. And he was like stressing that the economic survey forecast of 6.5% growth for upcoming financial year was well within the range of those estimated by other agencies. And India's merchandise trade deficit, it was like running at $30 billion around the third calendar quarter of 2022. It has been steadily shrinking. So merchandise trade deficit is steadily shrinking, which obviously relieves the pressure on the external account. And forex reserves, after having dipped all the way through October, they picked up again. And because of the slight withdrawal of portfolios in January and Feb, that has like shown a slight decline again. So nonetheless, whatever concerns people have with respect to India's external situation at the moment seems somewhat unnecessary. So it is something that we need to keep a lookout for, but there is no need for exaggerated concern regarding the numbers of the current account deficit. So we have. So again, Adani is planning to repay a debt of around $790 million in order to regain the trust and confidence of the investors, because right now the situation is again not so good for the Adani group of companies. Coming to the main, so why GDP growth slowed and what is the way out? So we saw that basically this graph is showing the figures for the private consumption growth. So obviously they have a positive relation when we are talking about the private consumption growth and the GDP growth. So after the pandemic, we saw it was constantly increasing, and then it shrank, and then again it was increasing, then again it has declined, and right now it is at 2.1%. So GDP growth for October to December, it came at 4.4%, falling from 6.3%. So why did GDP growth it slowed down in this period? And it is to do with what the economist called a K-shaped recovery. So earlier we were talking about a V-shaped recovery, but now we are talking about K-shaped recovery. So what is the reason for the slowdown? So GDP, it is the sum of the private consumption expenditure, the government expenditure, investment, and the net exports. So in India, the private consumption, that is typically around 55 to 60% of the GDP. And so here, one thing becomes clear that more than 50% of India's GDP is driven by a private consumption. So we are a consumption-led economy. Secondly, during October to December, it was 61.6%. Also, it grew by just 2.1% in comparison to October to December 2021. And the slowdown in consumption growth, it seems to be because of the K-shaped economic recovery finally catching up with the overall consumption. So in a K-shaped recovery, the well-to-do continue to do well, and whereas others, they're not able to do so. So what is the evidence of K-shaped recovery? So looking and understanding the data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, it shows that the net sales of around 3,300 non-financial listed companies grew by around 15%, and this is the slowest in 2 years. So, but on the whole, the formal part of the economy seems to be holding out. So within the formal part, there is evidence of segments not doing well, and taking the case of Relaxo, which is a listed footwear manufacturer, its sales during October to December, they fell, and this is primarily because sales in the up to rupees 150 footwear segment have been negatively impacted. So this is through an example they're trying to explain things. So any other evidence of a K-shaped recovery? So mobile tele density, that has been falling for more than 5 years now. And in the third quarter, it stood at 82.6, that is 826 mobile connections for every 1,000 individuals. So it had peaked at 92 level also, and we are seeing that things are falling, so that these are basically clearly showing that we are under a K-shaped recovery path. So what does all this data tell us on the whole? So there's a significant proportion of the population still struggling with the negative economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. and situation is obviously still not normal for them, and this struggle can be seen in their consumption decisions. So unlike in the earlier years, these decisions, they are now having a greater impact on the overall economy. So this is primarily because the post-pandemic pent-up demand growth of the well-to-do seems to have been slowing down from the earlier levels now. So earlier, when we were talking about a V-shaped recovery, that was majorly being driven by the pent-up demand. And since that is now slowing down, so we are seeing again slowdown. So what can the center do to drive the growth? So investment growth during the period stood at 8.3%, but this has come on the back of a low base, and investment growth was around 1.2% for the third quarter. So the government expenditure has also contracted by 0.8%, and if India has to grow at more than 6% in the upcoming financial year, as it is being forecasted, the government will have to continue playing an important role in the whole exercise. So ending with the quote of the day, the trend that we have in terms of high frequency data for the fourth quarter of the current financial year to indicate that achieving that growth rate in quarter four is well within the realm of the possibility, and therefore the 7% real GDP growth estimate for the current financial year is very realistic. So coming from our Chief Economic Advisor, V. Anant Nageswaram. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in Sarkari. I hope you're clear with all the terms and the topics that we discussed today. And you'll be getting the PDF link in the description box. Thank you so much for joining us. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share this video as much as possible. Thank you so much.